Breaking news at this hour, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is freed and is in Australia now. Israeli Supreme Court ordered ultra-Orthodox Jews to report for military duty. Good morning. Welcome to Amir 5858. I'm Amir. I am thankful to all international news resources and my team. Following news which have been reported by the American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, Australian channels and AP, AFP and Reuters news agencies. Now the headlines again. Israeli Defense Minister in Washington. Hezbollah and Israel exchange fires on Lebanon's border. UN suspend Gaza humanitarian assistance program. Kenya is in turmoil. ICC issued 2 warrants against Russian officials. Membership of Ukraine and Moldova in European Union. Gag order against Mr. Trump has been lifted partially. More rain is expected in Midwest, Iowa, Dakota, in USA. Children starve in Sudan and Gaza. Young men don't go to college in USO. US Surgeon General said gun violence is rising health crisis. New Caledonia and French. Trudeau party lost by-election in Toronto. Inflation rising in Canada. French election debate between the candidates. Now watch the TV channels.
Security crime in exchange for his release.
The U.S. Surgeon General declares gun violence a public health crisis.
And a behind-the-scenes look at how the PBS News NPR Marist poll is conducted.
Why do you think people should trust polls?
I don't know that it's about trust and it's about faith. It should really be about science.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, a brave whistleblower to his allies, a national security threat to his critics, is on the verge of being a free man.
Assange is pleading guilty in a court in the Northern Mariana Islands, that's the U.S. Commonwealth, and will be sentenced to time served, allowing him to return to his native Australia. Nick Schifrin is here tracking the story. Nick?
Jeff, Assange is notorious for some of the largest leaks of classified information in U.S. history, as well as posting emails that played an outsized role in the 2016 election. And tonight, the WikiLeaks founder is ending a decade-long legal saga with the U.S. and heading home.
In the day's other headlines, Israel's Supreme Court ruled that the military must draft ultra-Orthodox Jewish men for mandatory service. The unanimous decision ends decades of broad exemptions. It also deals a political blow to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his governing coalition, which had long objected to this move. And it comes as Netanyahu's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is in Washington for meetings with Pentagon officials. As the war grinds on in Gaza and fighting between Israeli forces and Lebanon-based Hezbollah intensifies, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said diplomacy is key to avoiding a second front.
Hezbollah's provocations threaten to drag the Israeli and Lebanese people into a war that they do not want. Such a war would be a catastrophe for Lebanon, and it would be devastating for innocent Israeli and Lebanese civilians.
In the meantime, UN officials told Israel they will suspend aid operations in Gaza unless urgent steps are taken to protect humanitarian workers on the ground. Kenya's president has vowed to maintain calm, quote, at whatever cost, after protesters stormed the nation's parliament today. Frustrations boiled over as legislators passed a finance bill that imposes new taxes. Television cameras that followed the protesters inside showed the seat of government ransacked and vandalized. Outside, police fired live ammunition and hurled tear gas to disperse the crowds. Health officials say at least 5 people were killed. Both the U.S. State Department and United Nations have condemned the violence. The International Criminal Court in the Netherlands issued arrest warrants today for 2 Russian officials. Former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Military Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov are charged with war crimes for targeting Ukrainian power plants. The pair are unlikely to be detained as Russia doesn't recognize the court's jurisdiction. Russia's Security Council blasted the decision, calling it, quote, part of the West's hybrid warfare against our country. A U.S. State Department spokesperson says the U.S. supports any and all prosecutions of Russia's actions in Ukraine.
So we have made clear that there have been atrocities committed by Russian forces in their illegal invasion of Ukraine, and that there ought to be accountability for those atrocities. We support a range of international investigations into Russia's atrocities in Ukraine, including the one conducted by the ICC.
Meanwhile, European Union officials started membership talks with Ukraine today, as well as with Moldova. It's a major milestone for both nations, though the talks could take years to wrap up. Ukraine hopes to be a full EU member by 2030. A New York judge has partially lifted the gag order on Donald Trump from his hush money trial. The decision comes just days before the former president squares off against President Joe Biden in the first presidential debate. Trump can now comment publicly about the jurors and witnesses in the case. That includes his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, and adult film actress Stormy Daniels. But he's still barred from speaking publicly about court staff, including the judge himself, as well as the prosecution and their families. Trump's lawyers vowed to challenge today's decision, saying the gag order should be lifted completely. Norfolk Southern withheld key information during the response to last year's train derailment near East Palestine, Ohio. That is according to new findings by the National Transportation Safety Board. Dozens of cars fell off the tracks during the February 2023 crash, some containing toxic gases. Company officials advised firefighters to release those gases from several overheating cars to avoid an explosion. That so-called vent and burn sent toxic smoke into the sky. At a hearing today, NTSB members addressed evidence that Norfolk Southern held back data that the cars were actually cooling after the crash, and as it turns out, an explosion was not imminent.
Had there been more thought given to the evidence that was available at the time, had there been more opportunity for contrasting views to be shared and discussed, I feel like we might still be here today talking about a derailment, but I don't think we would be talking about a vent and burn. I think it's really unfortunate.
The investigation also found that a trackside heat sensor failed to detect a burning wheel bearing ahead of the derailment. That wheel bearing is suspected to have caused the incident. Oklahoma's Supreme Court ruled today that a state board's approval last year of the nation's first religious charter school was unconstitutional. The decision comes after a coalition of parents and faith leaders sued to stop its establishment. In its ruling, the court wrote, quote, "Under Oklahoma law, a charter school is a public school. As such, a charter school must be non-sectarian." The case comes after recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings that indicate a willingness to allow the use of public funds for religious entities. There's more rain in the forecast for parts of the Midwest already drenched by floodwaters. At least 2 people have died. In Minnesota, south of Minneapolis, county officials say a dam along the Blue Earth River, already damaged, will survive the flooding. Homes have been evacuated downstream, including this one left teetering as the ground beneath it erodes. Residents could only watch and hope that their dwellings will survive.
And now the front of our house, my family house, where I grew up, is threatened by the force of Mother Nature.
Governors of Iowa and South Dakota say the flooding has damaged roads and bridges, forced hospitals to evacuate, and left entire cities without power or safe drinking water. Officials have reported hundreds of water rescues. All this as the very same areas remain under heat warnings, many temperatures feeling 100 degrees or higher. And on Wall Street today, tech stocks led the way amid broader caution ahead of some inflation data later this week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by nearly 300 points. The Nasdaq rose by 220, and the S&P made more modest gains. Still to come on the News Hour, the crisis of starvation and displacement afflicting millions of children in Sudan and Gaza. Federal judges in Kansas and Missouri blocked President Biden's latest student loan repayment plan. And a look at why a growing number of young men are choosing not to go to college.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios. This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
A new advisory from the U.S. Surgeon General declares gun violence in America is an urgent public health crisis. The report, citing rising deaths of young people and broad mental health impacts, argues for a comprehensive approach to stem gun violence, similar to tobacco-related and motor vehicle-related deaths. The National Rifle Association today called it, quote, an extension of the Biden administration's war on law-abiding gun owners. Joining us now is Dr. Emmy Betts. She's an emergency room physician and director of the
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange could be just hours away from freedom after he accepted a plea deal with the U.S. government and was released from a UK prison. Assange took off from London's Stansted Airport Monday, ending a 12-year-long ordeal that saw him take shelter at the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years, followed by 5 years and other advocates for his freedom. In Gaza, Israeli attacks have killed dozens of Palestinians over the past day, including 14 people who were sheltering in UN-run schools in northern Gaza. Another attack on Khan Yunis killed at least 10 Palestinians as they were either seeking or helping shield aid supplies. UNRWA head Philippe Lazzarini offered a stark assessment of the situation in Gaza 9 months into Israel's slaughter. Leader Ismail Haniyeh, including his sister. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces have carried out more violent raids and arrested another 25 people. Israel's top court has ruled that ultra-Orthodox Jews in yeshiva schools are subject to the military draft and must immediately enlist or lose government funding. The Supreme Court decision risks further destabilizing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's fragile government coalition, which relies on 2 ultra-Orthodox parties. In Ukraine, Russian missile attacks killed at least 5 people, injured dozens of others in the eastern town of Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, Russia summoned the U.S. ambassador in Moscow and vowed to retaliate after a deadly Ukrainian strike on Crimea Sunday, which Russia says was carried out using U.S.-supplied missiles known as Ataxim. In Kenya, police deployed tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons on demonstrators as organizers call for a national strike and 7 days of rage to protest proposed tax hikes and demanding the resignation of Kenyan President William Ruto. Among the protesters was Alma Obama, the half-sister of Barack Obama, who was tear gassed by police during a live interview on CNN.
How can you tear gas your own people? Listen to them. Listen to these children. They're the future. They're 80% of our population. 80%. If they decided to turn against us, they can. And that is what they're doing now.
Reports have also emerged of a number of protesters who've gone missing. Authorities are surrounding the Kenyan parliament in Nairobi, which protesters plan to occupy. In other news from Kenya, armed forces are readying to deploy to Haiti with some 400 officers set to arrive there later this week. President William Ruto Monday held a ceremony for the first contingent of the UN-backed troops, part of a larger mission to combat worsening gang violence in Haiti. Many Haitians have opposed the mission, citing past international interventions that have contributed to political destabilization and humanitarian crises in Haiti. In New Caledonia, fresh protests have erupted after France extradited 7 independence activists, including protest leader Christian Ken, for pre-trial detention. New Caledonia has been under French control since its colonization by France in the 19th century, but some 40% of the population is Kanak, and a growing independence movement is seeking to end colonial rule. Back in the U.S., the Supreme Court has agreed to hear a challenge from the Biden administration to a Tennessee law blocking gender-affirming care for transgender youth. The case, which will be heard in the next term, could have major implications for trans rights in dozens of other Republican-led states. Rallies were held in front of the Supreme Court and across the country Monday as the nation marked 2 years since the right-wing-led court overturned Roe v. Wade, ending the constitutional right to an abortion. Nearly 24 states have since restricted abortion, with 14 states now banning the procedure. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke in Phoenix, Arizona, at a reproductive rights event marking the anniversary of the Dobbs ruling.
2 years ago today, the highest court in our land took a constitutional right that had been recognized from the people of America, from the women of America. And thereafter, in state after state, laws have been proposed and passed that criminalize healthcare providers. You know, in Texas, they provide prison for life.
In related news, a new study shows Texas has seen a 13% increase in infant and newborn deaths since the state imposed an abortion ban. And abortion is expected to be a major issue in Thursday night's debate between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. In Louisiana, a group of multi-faith and non-religious parents has filed a lawsuit over the state's new law mandating the 10 Commandments be displayed in public school classrooms. This is plaintiff Jeff Sims, a Presbyterian pastor with children in Louisiana public schools.
This new law doesn't just interfere with my and my children's religious freedom, it tramples on it. The separation of church and state means that families get to decide if, when, and how their children should be introduced to religious scripture and texts, not the state.
And prosecutors are recommending the Justice Department bring criminal charges against Boeing after the company violated a 2021 settlement that would have shielded Boeing from prosecution over 2 crashes in 2018 and 2019 that killed all 346 people on board. The Justice Department has until July 7th to decide whether to prosecute Boeing. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
On this Tuesday night, stinging defeat. The federal Liberals lose a long time riding to the Conservatives.
And it's clear that I and my entire Liberal team have much more work to do.
What's frustrating Liberal voters as questions hover over Justin Trudeau. Should he stay or should he go? Inflation takes a hike. What caused this surprise spike and what it might mean for interest rates? The road to catching car thieves. How dozens of arrests were made and almost 200 stolen cars recovered in Ontario. Plus, no Stanley Cup runneth over for the Oilers.
We're proud, but we're heartbroken.
And why one Ontario First Nation is celebrating Florida's win.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with what could be a sign of the times for the federal Liberal Party and the Prime Minister. The Liberals have failed to hold on to a Midtown Toronto seat they've had for 3 decades, losing it to a Conservative in a closely watched by-election last night. Don Stewart was elected in Toronto.
Liberals will need all the runway they can get to turn around their sagging fortunes before the next general election must be called by the fall of 2025. Donna.
David Aiken, thanks. There's some news about inflation tonight. After 4 straight months of declines, inflation in Canada was up in May. Canada's inflation rate rose from 2.7% in April to 2.9% in May. It's not a huge jump, but it means, according to Stats Canada, that the costs of servicing a mortgage are up about 23% compared with a year ago. Rent is up nearly 9%, gas up nearly 6%. Mackenzie Gray is looking into this for us. Matt.
The Liberals' political problems don't just stem from the by-election alone, Donna. Inflation, Donna, with markets now predicting Tiff Macklem's likely to hold interest rates.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. There is a big development in that wildfire in Labrador. It has now jumped the river, moving closer to a huge power plant in Churchill Falls. The river had acted as a natural fire break since the wildfire started rapidly growing last week, prompting most of the town's 750 residents to flee. A nearby power plant, where about 100 essential workers were stationed, has also now been evacuated.
there is a very much a heightened level of risk of fire propagation now on the
and supplies power to Newfoundland and Labrador as well as Quebec. Well, after a big spike in auto thefts in Ontario, police have begun cracking down, and today a police task force announced they've recovered millions of dollars worth of stolen vehicles. Between September and March, the task force says it made 124 arrests and recovered 177 stolen vehicles. Investigators say 44% of those arrested were out on bail, and 26 of those arrested are under the age of 18. Intelligence gathered by the task force also led police to dismantle an alleged criminal network last week tied to violent auto thefts and home invasions.
What is alarming about this investigation is that the vehicle thefts were not simply carried out in the middle of the night on an unoccupied...
On his critics, like Armstrong Global News, Montreal.
The federal government is asking all Canadians to immediately leave Lebanon. There was more instability in the region today as the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah and Israel exchanged cross-border gunfire. Tonight, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly said Canadians should avoid all travel to Lebanon. She's also urging all Canadians who are still in Lebanon to get out while commercial flights are still available. Israel's Supreme Court has ruled that ultra-Orthodox Jewish men must be drafted into military service. The unanimous ruling upholds an interim decision last month that the state had no authority to offer an exemption for ultra-Orthodox men. It is a politically explosive decision that threatens the stability of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government, which is supported by ultra-Orthodox parties. A 14-year legal saga for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is coming to an end. His lawyers have been working on a plea deal with American officials, Assange admitting to one charge of disclosing top-secret classified U.S. government documents in exchange for his freedom. He left a London prison and boarded a private jet, and this evening he landed in the Northern Mariana Islands, a U.S. Commonwealth in the Western Pacific. And after a court appearance there, he's expected to return home to Australia a free man. Redmond Shannon reports.
Come on, fire.
It began with this video of a U.S. apartheid.
Former BC Premier John Horgan has been diagnosed with cancer for a third time. Horgan has disclosed he has thyroid cancer. He's receiving immunotherapy treatment in a hospital in Berlin, where he is serving as Canada's ambassador to Germany. He says it was discovered during a routine follow-up of his previous throat cancer. He also had bladder cancer in his 40s. That Conservative by-election win in Toronto has ignited questions about the future of the federal Liberal Party and its leader. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said today he hears the concerns and frustrations of Canadians. He has led the party since 2013, held power for almost 9 years. Tonight, Eric Sorensen looks at what history tells us about political leaders who stay in the job. Accomplished ahead what this Chinese lunar probe just brought back to Earth. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for 2 top Russian officials suspected of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The ICC accused the former defense minister and Russia's highest-ranking military officer of attacking civilian targets in Ukraine. The court says there are reasonable grounds the men are responsible for missile strikes on Ukraine's electrical grid. It's the third time the court has accused senior Russian leaders of war crimes. Russia doesn't recognize the ICC and it has no power to arrest them, but the warrants do restrict where the men can travel. China's lunar probe has returned to Earth, bringing with it the first samples ever taken from the far side of the moon. The re-entry capsule touched down in northern China today, carrying lunar soil collected from the moon's unexplored side. It's believed the samples include volcanic rock and other material that are millions of years old, and scientists hope they'll reveal new details about the formation of the Earth, moon, and our solar system. The late host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek, is being honored with his own American stamp set. It looks like a Jeopardy game board. Every stamp has the same question. This naturalized U.S. citizen hosted the quiz show Jeopardy for 37 seasons. Trebek, who was born in Ontario but lived in L.A., died of pancreatic cancer in 2020. His stamp will be released on July 22nd on what would have been his 84th birthday. Heartbreak in Edmonton next. Sure, there's pain in losing, but there are Canadians to celebrate. No one can say it wasn't an exciting series, but hope turned to heartbreak in Edmonton last night after the Oilers lost to the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup final. We'll have to wait another year for a Canadian team to try to bring home the cup, but most fans are being good sports, and as Jeff Semple reports, there are still reasons for Canadians to celebrate.
Edmonton woke up Tuesday with a hockey hangover. The morning after, the Oilers' historic playoff run ended in crushing disappointment.
Honestly, it hurts. It hurts. Like, I'm speechless.
How are you feeling?
Be back.
Jeff Semple, Global News, Edmonton.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Whiteman's Pond near Kananaskis, Alberta. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The Democratic Party kingmakers have seen enough. Clinton world joining forces with Obama world and taking over the reins of the Biden campaign. A hostile takeover. Obama sees the race for what it is, a real nail-biter. But Biden doesn't always listen to Barack's advice. He actually questions his judgment. So Obama's going around Joe and is personally calling Biden's campaign chair and close advisors, asking about strategy and how Biden was taking their advice. He has the Biden campaign wired. Obama's people have ordered the Biden campaign to, quote, make sure Obama is in the loop on campaign updates. Obama's even making staffing decisions at Biden's headquarters in Wilmington. Obama's lieutenants warning they'll be watching Thursday night. No pressure.
Listen, this is the most important 90 minutes in Joe Biden's political career. It's in my viewpoint, one of the most important 90 minutes in recent American political history. Because if Joe Biden doesn't do what he needs to do Thursday, and I very much think he can, he's a solid debater, I'm not even sure Trump will debate on September 10th.
We agree. It's the most important presidential debate since Kennedy-Nixon, only because the whole world's tuning in to see if Biden can hack it. If he can't, they'll swap him out. If he can, the progressive takeover of America is imminent, because a second Biden term would bring this country to its knees. Obama's team not stopping, inundating Biden with last-minute advice.
Tell me, what's the one thing David Axelrod most wants to see Thursday night?
Well, look, I think from Biden, I would like to see him make this a very comparative exercise. Don't get caught up in that presidential trap of touting your own record and defending your own record endlessly.
That should be easy because Biden doesn't have a record. It's all hands on deck for the Democrats, so they're bringing in an expert, the only person who's debated Trump and Biden. She's back. Hillary's nagging Biden with debate tips now. Since Joe won't take her calls, Hillary's giving him advice in the New York Times. Hillary says the key to winning the debate, go hard on abortion, democracy, Jan 6, call him a convicted felon out for revenge, and, oh yeah, Joe should mention something about how he's going to lower costs. Hillary's giving Biden the answers, and CNN's probably giving Biden the questions. Remember, it's the same network that leaked her questions the last time. How do you trust the network that's been calling Trump Hitler to play fair? You can't. And if there's any time to play dirty, it's now. Because Biden's losing to Trump in every swing state, every one. And the media, like with all things, can't understand what's happening.
The debate is going to make clear the contrast between our president, the current president, who works on behalf of the American people, fights for the American people, and the former president, who pretty much spends full time fighting for himself. It's a contrast.
Tonight, the severe weather threat as we come on the air. 75 million Americans under alert. Storms from Chicago, the Midwest, now headed for the Northeast. President Biden and former President Trump, final preps tonight for the big debate. The manhunt in New York City focused on Central Park. And the famous actress now battling Alzheimer's. First tonight, that severe storm threat from the Midwest to the Northeast. Dangerous thunderstorms, hail, possibly damaging winds. Ginger Z standing by with the forecast. The high-stakes, earliest ever presidential debate just 48 hours away now, Thursday night. President Biden and the mock 90-minute debates at Camp David focused on substance. Donald Trump and what he's saying about Biden's ability on that debate stage and about the new rules involving mics and no audience. Tonight, special counsel Jack Smith revealing never-before-seen photos showing classified documents and how they were allegedly stored at Mar-a-Lago amid accusations from Trump's team that FBI agents mishandled the documents. And in New York tonight, the gag order partially lifted in the hush money case where a jury convicted Donald Trump. So what does this mean now that he can talk about it with this debate coming? Tonight, for the first time, Martha Raddatz on the $230 million U.S. built pier off Gaza. She is there to report on this being built to deliver humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians caught in the middle of this war. Martha tonight on the challenges in keeping this pier up and running. Just in, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange late today, now back on U.S. territory tonight to plead guilty after fighting extradition for years, where he will go free. In New York City, the urgent manhunt for a suspect wanted for sexually assaulting a woman in Central Park. Officers now flooding the park. Celine Dion now sharing a harrowing moment, suffering a seizure for several minutes on camera, and why she wants people to see it. Tonight, amid this heat, the major new nationwide recall involving more than a dozen brands of ice cream. And tonight, hear the family of a legendary actress revealing her battle with Alzheimer's.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is...
Tonight, picking his partner, former President Trump may be close to announcing his running mate with just 2 days until the high-stakes presidential debate. NBC News reporting on when we could find out who is joining Trump on the ticket. That key decision as President Biden and former President Trump prepare to face off in Atlanta. The primetime matchup could be the most watched moment of the presidential campaign. The new insight into the campaign's tactics for what could be a make-or-break moment. Also tonight, state of emergency. New video of catastrophic flooding wiping out roads and washing away homes in the Midwest. Residents on edge as a dam is on the verge of complete collapse. The onslaught of severe weather putting the nation's aging infrastructure to the test. The storm's targeting 29 million Americans as much of the country continues to bake in relentless heat. Mass power outage. Puerto Rico suffering as blackouts leave hundreds of thousands without electricity. Residents outraged as the island's main power company says it's suspending millions in maintenance projects. The new lawsuit as people continue to pay high rates for an unreliable grid. Deadly tax protests, violent demonstrations escalating in Kenya. Disturbing scenes as police shoot at protesters storming parliament. The government building set on fire. The president addressing the nation urging peace amid mounting unrest. Forced to fight, Israel's Supreme Court ruling ultra-Orthodox men must serve in the military. The decision, the latest blow to Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose coalition party could unravel without their support. Robo-Taxi City, a look inside Phoenix, where autonomous vehicles service is booming. We test out what it's like to hail a car without a driver. Our Valerie Castro joins us live to explain how it all works and if she'd do it again. Plus the new announcement on how the service is expanding. Is it coming to your city? Plus an officer putting his life on the line to save an elderly couple trapped in a fire. We'll show you how the officer burst into that house, pulling the two to safety before collapsing. How he's doing tonight. And the urgent search to find those involved in an ISIS-backed smuggling network. How they were able to enter the U.S. in the first place. Top story starts right now.
We begin with a major development in the Churchill Falls forest fire. That fire has now jumped the river, forcing remaining personnel to evacuate the town.
That's right. It is the news officials were certainly dreading, and they say conditions are not favorable for the next 24 hours. The highway from Labrador West to Churchill Falls is also closed, and there is a power outage in the region. NTV's Beth Penny has tonight's top story.
Unfortunately, we just got word that the fire has jumped the river, which is what we were trying to prevent. It's what we were all hoping wouldn't happen.
It's been the #1 fear, and now the growing wildfire has jumped the Labrador River, putting the town of Churchill Falls in further danger. Just following this afternoon's briefing, Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro announced that teams on the ground in Churchill Falls are now safely evacuating the area in a phased fashion.
There's really 3 levels of evacuation plans, as I understand it. One would be the current, where there's 80 to 100 people there on watch, on guard. The second would be where only essential employees remain while watching the fire and the fire dynamics. And the third would be full evacuation with remote capacity potentially available.
Some of the operations at the Churchill Falls generating station will now be done remotely. CEO Jennifer Williams says there was a preemptive decision made yesterday to reduce the plant's load in case a decision was made to evacuate some staff.
But it is limited operation, so
With us now to unpack the significance of the Tories' pickup in Toronto. With us now to unpack the significance of the Tories' pickup in Toronto, St. Paul, CTV pollster and Nanos Research founder and chief data scientist Nick Nanos. Hey, Nick, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
24 hours ago, we thought there was the tiniest of possibilities. What ended up happening would happen. As someone who does this for a living, were you stunned by what did happen?
Well, we all knew that the Conservatives were going to do better. I'm not sure there were a lot of people that felt that they were going to win. However, Vashti, one number particularly stood out for me, the advanced polls. What was clear is that the Conservatives were trailing until the advanced polls came in. What does this mean? The Conservatives won the ground game, that they hustled on the ground, they delivered their vote in advance, and it put them over the top. And it means that it was a failure of the local campaign team in delivering the Liberal vote.
The local campaign team for the Liberals was basically the national team. This candidate, Leslie Church, was almost handpicked, by the top people around the Prime Minister. She's very close to them. She was the former chief of staff for years for Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. The ministers and the Prime Minister themselves were in the riding day in and day out. I don't think they took it for granted. They knew that it was going to be a tough fight, but do you think they could have anticipated this outcome?
I don't think they anticipated or even expected this particular outcome. I thought that they probably thought that this was a gimme with the 24.
Correspondent. I'll be bringing you the latest from Greece and Cyprus live here on news and other TV programs. So join me here on France 24.
Natalie Sararikas, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Welcome back to the Paris Newsroom. This is Night Watch here on France 24. Our main stories. After over a decade of legal battles, asylum and jail, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is a free man after he pleaded guilty to one charge of espionage in a US court in the Western Pacific. The 52-year-old is now homebound, heading back to Australia. US journalist Evan Gershkovich goes on trial this Wednesday in the Russian city of Yekaterinburg, accused of spying on a Russian tank manufacturer, charges which he and the United States deny. And the lead candidates in France's snap parliamentary elections lock horns in an ill-tempered televised debate ahead of this Sunday's first round. Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, the far-right Jordan Bardella, and the hard-left Manuel Bompard exchanging accusations over purchasing power, immigration, and public services. Good evening to you wherever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on Fast 24. First up, a historic day. Those are the words of Julian Assange's lawyer after the WikiLeaks founder pleaded guilty to one charge of espionage in a US court in Northern Mariana Islands in the Western Pacific. After over a decade of legal battles, asylum, and more recently diplomacy, his release from a UK jail and subsequent liberation was all over in barely a day and a half. Judge Ramona Mangalona sentenced Assange to 62 months with time already served, down from the multiple life sentences he was facing over 18 charges of divulging US military secrets. Let's hear now from Assange's lawyer speaking after the court scene.
I also want to take time to thank the Australian people and the Australian government for all of the support that we've received from home in Australia. In particular, I want to thank our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, for his statesmanship, his principled leadership and his diplomacy, which made this outcome possible.
Earlier we spoke to our correspondent Adam Hancock in Sydney, who brought us up to date with the day's developments.
Julian Assange found himself in the very unusual surroundings of a US courtroom in the Pacific Island territory of Mariana Islands. He was in Saipan, the capital, in the US courtroom there. And it was effectively a bit of a formality, given that he had agreed to this plea deal arrangement with the United States. Obviously, there were still a few legal hurdles to get over. The judge was very thorough, going through all the details of his case over the years. But according to reporters in the courtroom, Julian Assange was very relaxed and looked confident that he could get this across the line. And in just the last few moments, the judge has agreed to this deal, accepting that the 62 months that he spent in the high-security Belmarsh prison in the UK was sufficient enough for the charge that he pleaded guilty to. And now he can leave court as a free man, and also he will not be threatened with extradition back to the United States, something that for a long time he's been trying to avoid. He spent all those years camped out in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and then obviously a number of years in Belmarsh prison. So now the plan, according to WikiLeaks, is that he will leave Saipan. He will again take the same plane that he's been on from the United Kingdom and head straight here to Canberra in Australia and return home.
Well, after all the developments over the past day and a half, reaction to Assange's liberation has been quite mixed. Take a listen.
He's been a whistleblower that's actually traded US secrets and also compromised US lives, as well as lives of many, many Western countries and Western governments, individuals. So on that hand, though, I don't see him as a hero.
I'm very happy he's been released. What Assange done is made us aware of something. I know this is borderline with law. I mean, I know that there are laws that needs to prosecute him, but my question is there are so many other borderline things that happens, and they have not been so much violently prosecuted. So my question mark is why with Assange so much, why with somebody else not so much?
I think it's great that he was released. I think that whistleblowers serve an important part in democracy, and that to be able to expose wrongdoings is very important.
Julian Assange's father, John Shipton, also spoke a short while ago.
Doing cartwheels is a good expression of the joy that one feels. That Julian is returned home, well, about to return home. Having Julian home to an ordinary life after 15 years of incarceration in one form or another is pretty good news.
David Smith, Washington bureau chief for The Guardian, brings us reaction from the US, which brought the charges.
I think there are certainly lots of freedom of speech advocates who applaud this, who always felt it was something of an injustice and argue that Julian Assange did play an important role in exposing US military war crimes, particularly in Iraq. And obviously there was debate over whether he went too far and published some unredacted documents and potentially put lives in danger, but in practice it was never demonstrated that any US military personnel were killed or injured because of those documents. And so for years there has certainly been supporters of Julian Assange waiting for this moment, claiming that this was really persecution and vindictiveness on the part of the US government. On the other hand, there are more traditional national security hawks, if you like, among them Mike Pence, the former vice president, who regard this as a travesty of justice and think Julian Assange should have been forced to come to the United States and serve his time there. So I think right into the end there's division over this, and then there's another section of the population, frankly, who it's a bit of a shrug. Julian Assange has faded from their attention for now, and they won't be watching this that closely.
David Smith there in Washington, and just confirming that the plane of Julian Assange has taken off from the US territory of the North Mariana Islands in the Western Pacific as he's walked away a free man after the plea deal with US authorities. Next up, the US journalist Evan Gershkovich is to go on trial this Wednesday in the Russian city of Yekaterinburg. Russian prosecutors accuse the 32-year-old Wall Street Journal reporter of spying for the CIA, charges which he and the US deny. The Kremlin has suggested there may be an opening for a prisoner exchange once the trial has concluded. Charlotte Hughes tells us more.
It's here in Moscow's Lefortovo prison that US journalist Evan Gershkovich has been held for almost 16 months. In March last year, the Wall Street Journal reporter was arrested on espionage charges in the city of Yekaterinburg, some 1,600 kilometers away, while covering the war in Ukraine. He's set to be tried in the same city on Wednesday, according to Russian prosecutors, who have accused him of gathering secret information from a Russian tank factory on behalf of the CIA. Gershkovich, the US government, and the Wall Street Journal firmly reject the charges.
To even call it a trial is unfair to Evan and a continuation of this travesty of justice that has already gone on for far too long. The Kremlin has clamped down severely on independent reporting, effectively turning journalism into a crime.
Gershkovich, who will be tried behind closed doors, could spend up to 20 years behind bars if convicted. Russian officials have indicated that after the trial, they may be open to a prisoner swap with the US, which along with others, has accused Moscow of detaining the 32-year-old for the purpose of hostage diplomacy.
The Kremlin realizes the value of the hostage that it has in Evan, and it will want to make sure that it gets something in return.
Gershkovich is the first American journalist to be accused by Russia of espionage since the Soviet era. He's among at least a dozen US citizens held in Russian prisons, either awaiting trial or serving sentences.
Moscow says it's banning domestic access to over 80 European media outlets in retaliation for a similar ban on its operators. The Russian Foreign Ministry's blacklist includes AFP and Politico that accuse the outlets of systematically distributing inaccurate information about Russia's war in Ukraine. It said it would review its ban if the EU lifted its restrictions on the RIA news agency and the Izvestia and Rossiyskaya Gazeta newspapers. Next, at least 24 Palestinians have been killed in 3 Israeli strikes in central Gaza, according to Hamas officials. 2 schools transformed into shelters for displaced people were hit. Israel said Hamas militants were operating inside the compounds. Further south, Israeli tanks have advanced deeper into western Rafah. It comes as the United Nations issued an urgent call for Israel to do more to protect humanitarian workers, saying it could otherwise be forced to suspend aid operations. Sophie Lamotte has this update.
What was once the playground of an elementary school is now a graveyard. And this is what's left of the building hundreds of people were sheltering in before it was bombed by the Israeli army on Tuesday. Across Gaza City, at least 24 people were killed.
There is no safety anywhere. We took refuge in more than one school, and every school we took refuge in was bombed, and many were killed. My husband was martyred, my house was destroyed, and my sister and her children were killed.
Israel announced earlier this week that it was shifting to a less intense phase of the conflict. And yet, local authorities are denouncing daily, deliberate and indiscriminate attacks on civilians.
The Israeli occupation has become focused on targeting tents, shelters for displaced civilians and inhabited homes.
Humanitarian officials say conditions for civilians and aid workers have worsened since early May. The UN says the situation has become so critical, it will have to suspend its aid operations across Gaza without increasing. Gaza Strip, where close to 500,000 people are still facing catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity, according to the UN.
The lead candidates in France's snap parliamentary elections have gone head-to-head in a heated televised debate. Prime Minister Gabriel Attal, would-be far-right Prime Minister Jordan Bardella, and the hard-left Manuel Bompard traded accusations over the economy, purchasing power and immigration. Let's hear some of what they had to say.
I don't understand this proposition which you haven't costed. Why should a 31-year-old worker have to pay taxes but a 29-year-old trader shouldn't? Why should this be a general rule for all under 30s? If we listen to you, Kylian Mbappe shouldn't have gone to Madrid. He should have stayed here because with your rules, he would have been exempt from paying taxes. It makes no sense. Tax justice means paying according to your income.
If you talk to shopkeepers and entrepreneurs, they tell you people don't have money to spend. If you give people more money to spend, that's money that goes back into the economy. Mr. Attal, you made different choices when you handed gifts to the richest people in this country. They put the money in their savings accounts, and it doesn't feed the economy.
France 24 senior reporter James Andre says the incumbent, Gabriel Attal, came through the strongest.
In all fairness, it's probably Gabriel Attal who did a pretty good job of, he had all his figures straight, all his facts straight. And it was interesting to note how it actually played out with Gabriel Attal basically defending his own, legacy as a prime minister. Obviously, he was there for 5 months, but also the 7 years of Emmanuel Macron, because as we know, that is, the overarching figure when it comes to the centrist movement. And basically, defending the decisions that were made by, his boss, including when it comes to COVID, when it comes to all the spending that's been done, and also taking those jabs in from the other ones, indeed, the 2 other candidates who were, saying that, too much had been spent. That's something that Jordan Bardella said. Also, where we had Manuel Bompard attacking the centrist movement, and Gabriel Attal when it comes to equality in society. Gabriel Attal fighting back, saying that with him there would be no hike in taxes, and that his 2 opponents would indeed hike taxes. One in a way that is very clear and obvious, one in a disguised way. But anyway, what we saw here was a political debate that was good quality, if you will, with clear points that were made, basically everyone defending their objective. I'd say, if you were to rank everyone, I'd say Gabriel Attal came in first, Jordan Bardella second, because it was a good, show, if you will, when it comes to communications. It's a 28-year-old man who's done a good job on that set. And third, I'd say Manuel Bompard, simply because yes, he was being picked apart by the 2 others as well, and he does represent something which is more divided and less clear when it comes to the objectives than maybe the other 2.
And that's where we leave it for this edition of Night Watch. Thanks very much for staying with us here on France 24. See you next time.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Eye on Africa. I'm Paris Fortuné. In our top stories today, Kenya, President William Ruto vows to provide a full response after 5 people died and the parliament was ransacked during huge protests over tax hikes. Already cracks in the new national unity. South Africa's 2 biggest parties are now fighting about who gets which ministry. And the morpho has become all the rage. The colorful veil from Mauritania is making the buzz on social media in a very conservative society. But first we start in Kenya. President William Ruto vowed to take a tough line. Today, a court accepts a guilty plea from WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to a charge of violating US espionage law. Almost 80% of homes to be powered by rooftop solar by 2050 under a blueprint for the clean energy transition. At least 5 people killed in Kenya in violent protests against controversial tax changes. And the Blues and Maroons to go head-to-head tonight at the MCG, with New South Wales looking to keep the series alive. Hello and welcome to Mornings on ABC News. I'm Gemma Vaness. Let's have a look at the weather in the capital cities now. It's a partly cloudy day for Brisbane today, sunny in Sydney and partly cloudy also in Canberra. Melbourne getting a shower or 2 there, also a possible morning shower for Hobart. Showers for Adelaide and Perth, and in Darwin it is a sunny day heading for 31 degrees there. A US federal court has accepted a guilty plea from Julian Assange at a hearing for the Australian WikiLeaks founder that's underway on the Pacific island of Saipan. The 52-year-old earlier entered a plea on 1 count under the US National Security Act. That charge, conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defence information, carries a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison. He says he broke the law by encouraging classified leaks, but says the
This is Asia Now.
Good afternoon, it's 12 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 in New Delhi and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Milifia Silveraji. Headlines this hour. Julian Assange is a free man after years of legal drama over one of the largest leaks of classified information in US history. He was sentenced to time served by a US judge in Saipan after pleading guilty to 1 felony charge. South Korea says the North launched an unknown ballistic missile towards its east coast as trilateral drills with Japan and the US begin, and just a day after the 74th anniversary of the Korean War.
I'm Tan Si-Hui, and I'm at the Summer Davos in Dalian, China, at the World Economic Forum. It's the second largest meeting at the WEF. And one of the main themes is the momentum towards green transition. And I'll be speaking to a head of a company that recycles critical battery materials. So more on that later on the show.
Unprecedented sight in Kenya. Protesters breaking through the fences of Parliament. Part of the building was on fire Tuesday as legislators fled. The vote of the controversial finance bill was marred by violence. This prompted the defense minister to deploy the army and the president to address the nation.
Today's events mark a critical turning point on how we respond to grave threats to our national security. I assure the nation that the government has mobilized all resources at the nation's disposal to ensure that a situation of this nature will not recur again at whatever cost.
Demonstrators reportedly tried to storm the State House in the western city of Nakuru and burned ruling party offices in central Kenya. The day of mobilization resulted in loss of life and property. During the address of President William Ruto, he promised the Kenyan youth to provide a framework for conversation to be processed and its outcomes implemented. The leader has 2 weeks to sign the controversial finance bill into law. His administration did drop some tax proposals from the bill last week, but frustrations over the high cost of living remained. Last year's finance law introduced a 1.5% housing tax on gross income for salaried individuals and doubled the VAT tax on petroleum products from 8 to 16%.
A couple hundred police officers from Kenya landed in Haiti's capital Port-au-Prince, whose main international airport reopened in late May after gang violence forced it to close for nearly 3 months. They are the first batch of 1,000 troops that Kenya expects to deploy to the Caribbean country. Their arrival is taking place nearly 2 years after Haiti requested assistance to quell a surge in gang violence. The gangs control 80% of the capital, with government forces pinned back. On Monday, Kenyan President William Ruto flagged off the troops. Their mission is deeply unpopular in Kenya and was declared illegal by a court. There has been a long record of foreign military interventions in Haiti. The US invaded and occupied Haiti from 1915 to 1934, overseeing a system of forced labor and widespread human rights abuses.
A pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court (ICC) issued Tuesday arrest warrants for Russia's former defense minister Sergei Shoigu and current chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces Valery Gerasimov. The judges say there are reasonable grounds to believe that the officials bear responsibility for missile strikes carried out by the Russian army against the Ukrainian electric infrastructure from at least October 10, 2022 until at least March 9, 2023. Shoigu and Gerasimov are allegedly responsible for the war crimes of directing attacks at civilian objects and causing excessive incidental harm to civilians or damage to civilian objects, and the crime against humanity of inhumane acts under the Rome Statute. Last year, the ICC issued a warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Like the US and Israel, Russia isn't a member of the court.
On June 19, the Court of Cassation in Paris ruled in favor of Port of Douala in its dispute with the French group Bolloré over container terminal concessions. The court overturned a previous decision by Paris Chamber of Commerce, which had ordered the port to pay 58.6 million euros to a Bolloré subsidiary that lost a bid for the concession. This marks a major victory for the Port of Douala in a 5-year legal battle against Douala International Terminal, formerly a Bolloré subsidiary now owned by MSC Group. The terminal had sued the port after losing the contract renewal for the container terminal. Bolloré and its partner APMT had managed the terminal for 15 years and claimed the bidding process was unfair. In early 2019, the terminal sought arbitration with the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. In November 2020, the chamber ordered the port to pay 58.6 million euros to the terminal for damages.
Iran is poised to elect a new president on June 28. Speaking in Tehran, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called Tuesday for maximum voter turnout. 6 candidates are vying for the presidency after Ibrahim Raisi died in a plane crash in May. The Islamic Republic has enemies. One thing that helps the Islamic Republic overcome its enemies is the elections. If a good turnout is seen in these elections, then it will make the Islamic Republic proud.
این مایه سرافرازی جمهوری اسلامی است.
Khamenei's comments in his hour-long speech drew repeated cries of death to America, death to hypocrites and infidels from a crowd gathered to mark the Shiite holiday of Eid al-Ghadir. The leader's call comes after a parliamentary election earlier this year saw a record low turnout. Iranians endure the consequences of Western sanctions that have crushed the nation's economy.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.